Hey, this is Christian Buckley doing another MVP Buzz Chat. I'm here with Tom. Tom, hello.
Hey, Christian, how's it going?
Pretty good. Why don't you introduce yourself, tell everybody where you are, who you work for, all the details.
Sure. So my name is Tom Morgan. I work at Modality Systems. I'm a product innovation architect there, which is like a crazy job title.
That's very fancy. Wow.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's one of those. It's great. It means I can do kind of lots of different things, and nobody really knows what I'm supposed to be doing.
I don't know, but you have innovation in your title. It puts a lot of pressure on you. You can't just kind of, exist. You've got to constantly create.
Right. So I spend a lot of time talking to customers, understanding kind of what their needs are, trying to figure out, where the market's going as well, and then trying to bring some of our amazing dev resource as well into producing, products and solutions for the future. So I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the Teams space, so I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about Teams product as well.
And so what's your background with, of course, Teams being a couple of years old, but I know because you also work with Skype, and what's some of your background there?
Yeah. So I've been at Modality 7 years. I'm a developer by trade, so I've only come into the UC world in the last 7 years. So I'm kind of a relative newcomer to a lot of the guys who've been kind of looking and working in PBXs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm bringing a very developer-focused kind of mindset to all this stuff, and that's come through Link and then through Skype, and then obviously onto Teams as well, because there's a whole development platform in Teams as well that's kind of built up around the Teams products as well, and that's really, really interesting at the moment, and that's some of that is still being built, some of that's new, some of that has been around longer, and there's a million different places that can go, so it's a really exciting time at the moment.
I'd actually like to talk to you maybe, offline sometime, a little more detail about that, because I mean, as you know, it's there's a lot of cool things that are coming. There's a lot of things that can't come fast enough in the Teams space. But one of the frustrations from a number of partners I know is that the limited, API capability with Teams. Of course, you can go and build bots and connectors and other kind of integrations that way, but as far as being able to go and really, build alongside it, inside of it, like you have like SharePoint and other products, it's not there yet. Kind of, what's your take on where it is today?
It's definitely a different mindset, and it's definitely a different mindset to how it used to be in Skype for Business, because that was on premise. You had loads and loads of control over how those SIP messages flowed around your system, because it was your system, and if you wanted to kind of look at every message and do something in real time, that's totally up to you. Now that it's kind of shifted to Teams and it's entirely cloud, that model doesn't really work anymore. So there's different integration points, and there's a new calling API, actually calls the Meetings API, that brings lots of that functionality that we used to build in, say, UCMA for like IVR solutions and contact centers and things like that. You can now do a lot of that with the kind of calling API, but it is a different model because it's cloud-based. It's very API specific, which is good. Like, it's good because these are HTTPS API calls. This is a very common language. Like, you don't need to be a hardcore, developer in the UC space to understand this stuff. It's more accessible, right? But that comes with some limitations around what you can do. Because it is a managed service, you don't get that same level of control. So it's kind of horses for courses. It's some things are good, some things are bad. But I think the general direction of travel, though, is more ability for developers to do stuff. That's definitely what we're seeing. There's more and more stuff coming through the APIs, every kind of 3-6 months as well. It's definitely still an evolving picture. So it's an exciting place. But I think that's the other exciting part of it as well, though, is Teams is evolving and becoming this great kind of tool for where people get stuff done and go to collaborate and go to work on all their documents. And it's becoming that operating system for work, right? So if that's where all the users are, like if you're a developer, that's where you need to be, right? And that's where your users are. Like, don't make them go off to some other thing. Like, if you can bring the data you own or the services you're responsible for, if you can bring them into teams, you're doing your users a better service.
Yeah, I just had at this conference I was at in Copenhagen last week. There was, there was a whole conversation. I did a half-day Teams on a workshop on information architecture. There are a lot of questions, just kind of side topics. Like, I didn't get into the telephony side of it. It was not what the workshop was about. Because a lot of the guys that the MVPs, the people that been working in that space for many, many years. And as you said, you feel like you're newer to the space as well. They're old telecoms people. They came from that voice side of things into Skype. But it was really positive to hear a number of these end users at this conference talking about moving away completely from the Skype interface and just using Teams now and working with, partners and, each other that were, through that Teams just for the chat capability. And so we start to see that adoption to start to pick up now that people are moving away from Skype for Business.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of the like people I talk to in that Skype for Business world, there are a lot of consultants and a lot of support engineers and stuff. There's a bit of a kind of a fear as well that everything is, Microsoft Teams is becoming everything, and like it was all going to the cloud. What does that mean? But I think there's a real opportunity as well, because at the same time that all that's happening, data is becoming really important. And the way that what I mean is, like, around us as we evolve, and much broader than Teams, much broader than Skype for Business, but like the way that all the big problem domains are reducing down to data. So let's take self-driving cars, right? A really hard problem domain reduces data. That's happening everywhere. So everything is going down to data. So apps, bots, the way we communicate with our data becomes really important. Now that's a huge opportunity for communication specialists, because suddenly that is super important when everything is just data and you're just talking to a bot or an interface. Like, that's really important. And these guys are, communication specialists. So there's a massive opportunity, combined with what I said earlier about it being easier to do these developed solutions. There's massive opportunity to join those dots together in some of the things you can do in Teams. You don't need to be a hardcore developer to take advantage of, say, bots. You can go and spin up a bot in Azure and get it up and running without writing code. Like, you can start to understand it. You don't need to go on like a 6-month training course to get started with this stuff. So that's like an example. You take connectors, like you can make an incoming webhook connector, like switch that up with PowerShell, because PowerShell is a thing a lot of IT pros like are really comfortable with. They say they're not developers, but everybody uses PowerShell, right? So everyone is a developer. They just don't think they are. Like, take those incoming webhooks. Like, that's suddenly you're starting to like hook these stuff together, and that's what you get out of it is happy users. So it's it's really interesting.
Well, I like the way that Microsoft approached it at the beginning too, with some of the the initial bots and connectors that they pushed out there. They said, look, go take a look how, a lot of them that were out there, and with anything new, some of the first complaints were like, well, these bots are, they're very limited capability. I'm not impressed by. It's like, no, but all the companies are going and building the first version of it. They're experimenting, trying to understand what can be done within this environment. So you're getting more and more sophistication that's coming through that, more complex integrations and bot capabilities, plugging into other outside services. So you're just seeing more and more that's happening there. But a great way to begin is go take a look at some of those more simplistic bots and connectors. Pull them apart, look at them, and make modifications to it. And
because they're all on GitHub now. It's like new Microsoft thing. All the samples are in GitHub. They're very open about stuff, very responsive to the issues as well. And it's definitely it's much easier, I think, to get started than it was, for sure.
So what are some of the topics that you're out there talking about? Like, what are you passionate about these days?
Yeah, so the calling API, that's interesting because it's kind of new and still evolving, and there's not many people kind of doing really interesting things with it at the moment. So I'm talking about like how you can use that to build an IVR solution. So like my demo that I kind of using at the moment is like a bot that you call in Teams, and it gives you the time and it gives you the weather for the city you're in. So that kind of like using a couple of different API calls to put that stuff together. So I go through how you can build one of those. And the weather's a nice like example because it's simple enough to do inside of an hour talk. But everybody gets that, like, no, you know, you don't want a bot to tell you the weather, but like it's the opportunity, it's the ideas, right? Like that could be my API for my ordering system or my products or whatever else it is for users. So that's kind of an interesting place. And then there is a general kind of thing going on at the moment that I'm talking about around developing in Microsoft Teams when you're not a developer. So some of that stuff I was just talking about actually of like, let's pick some examples where you're not writing code from scratch, but you're taking samples, like digging through them and just saying, hey, if I was coming to this for the first time, what would I look at? Like without that developer mindset, like let's just look at this and try and understand what it's doing by kicking the tires on it, figuring out what we can change, which bits we can keep, which bits we never have to look at and understand because it doesn't matter. Let's focus in on the bits that we can change and make it work for us, make it work again for, like, you know, my system, my organization, my users, to really get that value, kind of high value quickly.
Yeah, I think that there's always going to be room for that kind of help where it's not just telling them, hey, look, this is what you can go and do. And look, I've already built this. This is how it works. But walking folks through kind of step by step very quickly, but to show how, and then build upon that, like go and build a simple solution, now add some complexity to that. But those kinds of, you know, that kind of training, you're seeing more and more of that. Like Microsoft is doing a better job at that kind of content, providing different use cases, even, you know, industry specific solutions, and then building content out around that. But you're going to see, we're seeing more and more from the community, of course, as well. But people just eat that kind of content up.
Yeah, and it's hard to know like what you can build and what's possible unless you see some examples, right? Like you need to start firing some of those neurons and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. Like that's interesting. I didn't know you could do that. Like I get that quite a lot with the calling bot, because you don't see many bots that you can call. Like you don't see any bots you can video call. That's also a thing you can do. It's just, I'll get there eventually. It's time. Like
something similar is in the Powerups and Flowworld. I mean, those folks, and a lot of it, you can almost kind of see it in their, you know, certain people that I follow that, you know, just in the progression of the tweets and other social messages that they leave, you know, on Facebook and elsewhere, where they're, you know, definitely going in, experimenting with something. They're talking about, you know, building on and adding that in each of their aha moments that are sharing those things. So it's a lot of fun to kind of see that progression. Yeah,
no, it's an exciting place to be for sure, and it's exciting as well because it's inclusive. You know, it's not, I kind of keep banging on about this, but it's not as hard as it sounds. It's not as hard as it used to be for sure. You know, back in like the ECMA days, like that was quite a specific technology. You needed to take on and onboard quite a lot to get started with that. It's not like that at all. Yeah.
Well, very cool. Well, you know, it's an exciting space. It's, you know, like you, I mean, I'm in there experimenting. I'm not spending quite as much time going and building, but it's something that, I mean, you're exactly right. I went in and for a client of mine that was trying to convince them to go in and build a connector, and went in and gave them, you know, showed them some examples. And so I went in and started experimenting with it to kind of show them the way, and they took that over and added on to that. And I'm a marketing guy. I'm not a dev by any means, but you know, it's you work in technology and you understand your business requirements. You can go and start, you know, playing with these different tools. And as you said, go and look at the downloads, the demos, the versions that are out there in GitHub, and you should find something that is similar, and then be able to, you know, very, very quickly be able to add on to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just understand what's possible, understand all the different places you can extend Teams, because, you know, there's lots of them. Like we haven't even talked about messaging extensions. They're like super interesting for me, but kind of I feel like a little bit underutilized. So I always try and kind of bang those as like a good way of bringing in third-party data. And just, again, it's making it easy for users to kind of interact with that data, not making them switch apps to go and get it. And again, pretty easy to build. So yeah.
Well, so how can people find out more about, like, I'm sure you've got a blog and some content that you'd like to point people towards around this stuff, but what's the best way to to find out more about this and to find out more about you and get in contact with you?
Yeah, so I do blog as much as I can at thoughtstuff.co.uk. That's like a good landing page to go to. You can go to my blog from there. I've got a bunch of code samples as well. They're on GitHub, but they're linked there. That's probably the best place to go. I'm on Twitter as well at Tom Morgan, which is TOMORGAN. But again, hit thoughtstuff.co.uk, like go out from there.
Did you say your blog is called Thought Stuff?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very specific. I like it.
It's always hard to find a name. It was
I know. I like that. I like it. So
yeah.
Hey Tom, really, I appreciate your time today. Thanks a lot for sharing some of this, and hopefully people get out and take a look at your blog and reach out if they got questions.
Sounds good. All right, thanks for having me. Cheers.
What?